I can't see anything down here. Could I get some light on this, please? Ah, much better. So now that we got what I think are some of the most pertinent issues with Industrial Craft out of the way, let's go over some of the smaller features, which I think still deserve just a little bit acknowledgement. So of course, we all know about the ore processing of IC2, in which you macerate, you smelt, and you double your stuff. And you got the induction smelter, and the compressor and extractor. We all know about that stuff. What about the power generation? We know about the generator and the windmill. Nobody's ever used the windmill because it's just too much of a hassle to use. Of course, nobody ever used the scaffolding either, which they could have used to get the windmill up into the sky, but there you go. Nobody used the scaffolding. We got the geothermal generator, which was a popular favorite when people could pipe lava out of the nether basically for free with the use of either ender chests or ender pumps or tanks or whatever they were back then. And of course the solar panel. Now the solar panel itself was not that great. It produced, I think, 1 EU per tick. But of course you had the add-on mods, which quickly became a game ender thanks to EE2 and auto crafting. So you had the low voltage, medium voltage, and high voltage solar arrays, and people quickly built factories to mass produce the high voltage solar arrays. However, one of the lesser loved power gen options was the Watermill. Now some people did use the Watermill, but they typically set up a Red Power 2 contraption to fill it with buckets, and it could take either buckets or water cells, but it would consume the cell in the process. However, most people didn't really notice that the Watermill could simply be surrounded by water and idly produce power that way. Of course, it would only produce about 1 EU per tick. Whereas if you put a bucket of water into it, it would produce 2 EU per tick. Another one of the lesser used features was the pump, which I talked briefly about with the electric miner. Now the pump could suck up water from underneath it, effectively being a way of automating getting water cells. So in fact, if I get myself some empty cells, I can put these in there, and it will automatically fill the water cells, or the empty cells, with water. However, if there's no inventory adjacent to it, it will just pop the empty cells out in any direction. So if I give myself a chest and place a chest next to it, it should now start putting the water cells into the chest. There we go. So that was a good way of getting the water cells. Of course, nobody really noticed that. However, it did work much to the same effect as the Buildcraft pump, in which you had to have an infinite water source underneath it in order for it to operate. So there you go. Another one of the lesser used features was the Magnetizer. The Magnetizer was kind of like an anti-gravity fireman pole, in which if you went up to it, it would shoot you up into the air. So if I go up to it, oh, I forgot, I had a jetpack on. So if I go up to it, nothing happens. A little bit strange, right? The Magnetizer works by building the Magnetizer, powering it with low voltage, and it's typically good to have something like a bat box next to it. And you have to stack iron fence on top of it to create a pole. However, most people couldn't get this thing to work. because unfortunately it required metal boots. But that makes sense, right? There we go. As soon as I put on the metal boots, I shoot to the top. And it does shoot you up into the sky with so much velocity that if there's not something to block your ascent, you will just shoot up really far and fall to your death. But now that you've gotten up, how do you get back down? You can't ride it back down. You have to build a trampoline with rubber sheets. And like a trampoline, you do bounce on it. So there you go. Another two things that were widely overlooked. The Magnetizer, however, had very little documentation on it. So I can understand why there was just no use of it. And now let's talk about the teleporters. The teleporters were another very underused item, I think. In most scenarios, the teleporter would calculate how much energy it has to use in order to teleport a player. So the best thing to do was to have like 4 MFSUs all powering a single teleporter, so that you'd never have a lack of power in order to travel a certain distance. So if I press this button, it teleports me over here. And the teleporters can be bi-directional, so it will teleport you back and forth. But that's not the only thing that these teleporters could teleport. They could also teleport entities like a chest cart. So if I get myself a chest cart, I can't put it down. I'll have to put down some track. So I'll put down a track on either end of the teleporter. I'll place the chest cart on it. And I'll place all these items into it. And now if I press the button, voila! Now this could have been a very useful method for being able to teleport items very far distances. And if we check the MFSU, it's full of power because I got a bunch of solar panels. So you know what? Let's actually get rid of some of these solar panels. Let's see just how much power it takes to transfer this chest cart full of items. Let's even put those in there. Press the button, and as we can see, it has used up quite a bit of power. Not a whole lot, but probably more than what is used for a player. So now if I try to teleport, I push the chest cart off, and that used significantly more power. I think that was significantly more power than what it used for the chest cart. So there you go. I don't really know if this ever worked with items. Oh yeah, turns out it does. So I could throw an item on it, and it would teleport. Pretty neat, huh? I really like the teleporters. But not many people really use them because they were kind of a pain to set up, and sometimes confusing. Because in order to set them up, you had to have a frequency transmitter, and you had to link the two together. Which that itself was a pain. So another thing that was largely overlooked in IndustrialCraft2 was the fact that there was another method of storing energy which most people were not aware of. So if I look in this chest here, we all know we had the BAT box for low voltage, the MFE for medium voltage, and the MFSU for high voltage. But there was also the Electrolyzer, which could store power in electrolyzed water cells. Of course, this was pretty much overlooked because of the fact that there wasn't much use for them. I'm not sure what stage of progress you were meant to be at to electrolyze water to store power, but it wasn't really used for anything in IC2. There were add-on mods that made use of it, which I thought was good. You could use the electrolyzed water cells for the centrifuge extractor as well, but again, that wasn't an integral part of IndustrialCraft2. That was an add-on for it. So, the electrolyzer, not that great. There were much better options, and people typically just used the MFSU or the MFE or energy crystals. So, yeah, electrolyzer never got any love. Another thing that never got too much love was the Tesla coil. Now, the Tesla coil was a bit of a hazard, I would say. Of course, you could control it with redstone. If you applied redstone signal directly to it, it wouldn't actually electrocute you. It would stop functioning. However, the Tesla coil targeted everything, so pretty much everything would get electrocuted by this thing. And if you set up like a few of them, pretty much no player would ever be able to get close to them. They did a ton of damage and were just really painful. I think the only thing that could survive these was the quantum armor. And that leads me to the next thing. IndustrialCraft added a lot of different types of armors. Of course, we all know about the quantum suit because it made us indestructible. There was the nano suit. But of course, we also had the lesser used thing like the composite vest. The composite vest was pretty useful, at least getting started. Put on the quantum vest, and it gives you a lot of armor. It's a very sturdy piece of armor, but a bit of a hassle to craft, because as you can see, you require advanced alloy, leather tunic, and an iron chestplate just for the composite vest. But it could take a huge beating. And of course, I consider the backpack and jetpacks to be a part of that armor repertoire. The backpack, just storing energy so that you can use your electric tools. The lap pack, which is just an upgraded version of it. And the jetpacks. The jetpacks, not many people liked because they seemed kind of buggy at the time. You had the gas-powered jetpack, which would use BuildCraft fuel, which of course required you to use the refinery from BuildCraft since IC2 had nothing like it. And then you had the electric jetpack, which I think everybody went for. And the electric jetpack was a lot more expensive and did require a trip to the Nether in order to craft it. But totally worth it, I think. However, a lot of people had problem with the electric jetpack because fall damage. Fly up too high, you fall and get hurt. Of course, you could use rubber boots. Again, another thing that people rarely used to absorb that impact. So I could fly as high as I want, as long as I have rubber boots. The rubber boots take the majority of the beating. Now, people typically had trouble getting the jetpack to hover, because if you press the mode switch key while doing nothing, nothing happened. But if you're up in the air, you can press the mode switch key and set it to hover. So fly up real high and gently float down. So yeah, I did like the jetpack. I don't care what anyone says. So now we also have some of the tools. We all know the basic tools. You got the mining drill, bronze tools, the diamond drill upgrade, chainsaw, electric hoe, the electric tree tap, the electric wrench, normal tree tap, a nano saber, and the mining laser. Of course, one thing that kind of became a quick issue was the lack of hotbar space. If you have to keep switching between all these different items, you quickly run out of room, and it uses up your inventory as well. But that's what the toolbox is for. Something nobody ever used was the toolbox. You simply right-click, and it sucks up everything in your hotbar. So this was a great way for being able to store everything in your hotbar and have multiple toolboxes and have them all sorted. It was a great way for storing things in your inventory, but sadly never got any love because no documentation. Pretty sad. And the nano saber, I feel, is something that didn't really get used much that often anyway. Of course, you could right-click, and it would be kind of buggy. It would constantly shut off for some reason. So, I don't really know what the issue was with the nano saber, but it never really worked that great for anybody. So sadly, another bit of IC2 that went underappreciated.
I bet you were expecting some sort of fancy outro. Nope. Just this. But hey, you know what would be cool? Clicking one of those links below? Yeah, that'd make it cool.